for Shawn Bryant, who has been a well-renowned trainer and has been training with us for quite some time. So thank you for joining us again today, Shawn. We're happy to have you here.
Thank you, Catherine and Leah, and welcome everyone. I see some familiar faces, a few familiar names. So welcome, welcome, welcome. I'm happy to be back. This is First Five Alameda's second round with me, particularly in this topic of family engagement and this notion of being trauma responsive. It's a two-part session. So if you've, I've done this session in a few places, virtually and in person. Michelle Tyler, so sweet. I will say that much of what's in part one is the same. I've made many changes to part two. There are only about 4 slides that are different for part one in this session. So for those who maybe have gone through part one or part two before, because First Five did offer it and it's on their YouTube page, many changes are coming next week. All right, so I just wanted to get that clear. Leah just put the handout link in the chat. So if you want a copy of the handouts, meaning the slides and the accompanying handout for today, it is there. So again, welcome to the 55 people that decided to join us this morning. Happy to be here. So before we get started and I move the slides, I just want to say I've been training with First Five for over a decade. And this is my very first time with them not having control over my slides. So I was telling Leah and Catherine earlier that I oftentimes judge people when I'm on a Zoom as a participant and the person has to say, next slide, next slide, next slide. And this morning, one of my monitors went out and I kind of jumped on, we're here before you all. And I said, Leah, something's happening with my monitor. So Leah, she knows all things tech. And she says, oh, you can control it from your end, but I had emailed her my slide deck, which I've never had to do before, thinking she was going to have to move the slides forward. But in all of that, the slide was created on a Mac. It's being projected off of a PC. So what we found was that some of the fonts have changed and the formatting changed. So some of what you might see, maybe some wonky formatting on some of the slides, but the formatting in your handout is correct. So just for today, we will definitely work on this for next week to not have this problem, but we wanted to be forthcoming and share with you all what you might experience in terms of what you see compared to what's really in the deck because of the formatting changes that I did not know was going to happen, and I did not know I would be unable to actually share the slides from my monitor today. All right, so welcome to First Five sponsored Trauma Responsive Family Engagement. I am Shawn Bryant. I'm going to be your facilitator on this learning journey. Many of you on the call know me, so those who don't, this is my 30 plus year, 31st, 32nd. I stopped counting after 30 years in early childhood education. Those are my God kids you see behind me who are all in Oakland. That's Shola over my shoulders. She just got a report card and she had like all A's and 2 B's, and I was really happy for her. That's Buhai, my godson, who is now 12, and that's Madison, our rising kindergartner. So if you ever see me out and about with children, you probably will see me with them in the Greater Bay Area. And just a little bit about me, I won't read what's on the screen, but I like to keep these things present with everyone so that people know what brings me to this work and what sustains me in this work. And while everything about the work is important, these are particular things that I pull out in everything I do in terms of training, coaching, consultation, and all of my different roles. My role as the principal consultant for YesToECE, my role as director of adult learning and professional development at the Child Lab at Yale University. And my third role this September, I actually went back into the classroom. So I'm the pedagogical lead at a preschool and loving every minute of it and every challenge. And I'm actually documenting so much of it on TikTok. a lot of times I'll make TikToks at the end of my workday and talk about the experiences that I've had with children. And I was encouraged to do that by a young teacher who told me I needed to get on TikTok. So I had created the TikTok over a year ago, but I was making no TikToks because I felt like, I was too old to tick into talk. But through their encouragement, I started making them, and I actually enjoy it and find it therapeutic and just sharing with other folk out there. So if you're, courageous, join me on TikTok and you'll hear me talking about my work and big questions that come up for me and for the children who I share time and space with. And of course, if you're on social media, you can find me at other places. I had divorced Facebook some time ago, but at the end of last year, some colleagues of mine convinced me to get back on Facebook. So I rejoined, but I'm still trying to figure out how I want to be active there. But across all of those platforms, you can find me and find what I think is important for me to share that day, and hope to see you there. A lot of stuff is, I'm encouraged by what's coming up because I'm spending more time with younger people who are really into the social media in a different way. So I'm learning a tremendous amount from them, and they're helping this old guy in terms of social media. Of course, throughout this virtual learning process, we want you to kind of understand this notion of how we raise awareness about being trauma responsive and family engagement, to hopefully learn and practice some new skills through reflection. Like Leah said, what we won't do in any of these sessions, because there's such a short amount of time, is push you into breakout rooms and force you to talk to people. And we're not doing that because it's hard for us to monitor. We would need someone in each breakout room to monitor each breakout room because of the topic. So what we'll do is give you opportunities to reflect as a part of your learning process. And then the next component is we invite you to make sure you have something to write with for this virtual learning process, because we find that, and I don't want you to write notes based on what you hear me say. I want to challenge you to challenge yourself this morning to write down thoughts, feelings, memories, mindsets that come to you throughout this short learning time together, because those are the pieces that you can go back and reflect on and develop some reflexivity. You don't need to write down what I'm saying because it's on the slide deck. So rather, as your memories are activated, as you have other thoughts that come to mind, write those down and then reflect on them and ask yourself, why did I think about that? Why did I think about my old coworker? Why did I think about that particular family I worked with 3 years ago? Why am I thinking about my 7-year-old right now? Why am I thinking about my 14-year-old cousin? Or whatever feeling you're having, write those down and then have a dialogue with yourself about why that was important for you. You've created the community agreements for us here on the screen. So these agreements will just guide us through our short time together. I want you to unmute whenever it feels relevant to you. I want you to be open to new ways of understanding this notion of trauma and really family engagement. And then focus on, what can I take back to my work tomorrow? What can I take back and put into place on Thursday or Friday? What can I take back in terms of my role and responsibility, in not just my thinking, but my doing and my acting? And of course, we encourage you to use the chat box to stay engaged, to share out. And we will be asking you to type in the chat box. But you can also put other things in there if they're relevant to the topic. We just ask you to not give others advice. If they put something in the chat, we ask you to hold that and to not level up with that type of advice to anyone. So I've talked to you about we won't use breakout rooms. So this is one of those slides where when we're considering the overview, where it's kind of the fonts are off. So today we're going to cover what we mean by 21st century family engagement, and using some kind of 3 broad definitions to uncover 21st century family engagement, and regardless of our role and responsibility, how we can show up with those mindsets. And then we're going to juxtapose this notion of being trauma informed and trauma responsive, and then spend a lot of our time there today. And then in the next session, we'll talk about, we'll begin with being trauma responsive, and then move into state dependent functioning and what that is, and applying what we call asset strengths that disrupt inequities, and a notion around resilience. Okay. So Leah, I'm not paying attention to the chat the way I typically can. So if something happens to pop up in the chat, Leah, please let me know, because it's not on my screen the way it typically is.
Will do.
So much of the content today is coming right from the book, Trauma Responsive Family Engagement in Early Childhood, Practices for Equity and Resilience, where I'm a contributing author, along with some other great Bay Area folk who have been doing this work for a while. And in full transparency, the proceeds from the sale of this book go to Parent Voices Oakland. So the commitment to the authors was that we would pick an early childhood agency and there are a number of books in this series, and donate all the proceeds. So when you are selling books, typically the publisher sends you a quarterly check 4 times a year. I like to say every time the season changes, think of it as quarter, you'll get a check. But we don't get anything. That check goes to a different agency, and all the proceeds from trauma responsive family engagement go to Parent Voices Oakland. There are other books in the series and other books being created. Who knows? Your agency could become one of those agencies where the proceeds are donated to. And then we like to use science. So the finding of this notion of family science, I won't go deep into this, but this is one of those learning lifts for folk who want to know more around like family science as a scientific study of families and their close interpersonal relationships. Really considers evidence, their strengths. How can things be preventative? Of course, the relationship focused nature of that. And when those findings from science apply to teaching and practice, that's that notion of evidence-based, and that they're in real life. That's that translational one there, that the findings are meant to be real and applied in real life that strengthen families. So we anchor ourselves there with this notion of 21st century family engagement and trauma, as we'll lean into, and we can see that as part and parcel of one of the many ways we can be supportive and responsive to families. So one of the core themes that I like to hold up and spotlight is this is a metaphorical mirror we're looking at here as a core theme, that when parents and families look into this mirror, one of the reflective questions we should be asking ourselves is, what do they see? Regardless of their role and responsibility, if you're a preschool teacher, if you are an after-school program, if you are a social worker, a counselor, a coordinator who supports other people, if you're the admin assistant, whoever you are, if you work in a clinic setting, when parents interface with you, what is the message that their limited or their long-term interaction, what does it send to them? You know, is it sending to them this overarching message that they are enough, despite the complexities of their lives, despite the small T or big T trauma in their lives, that they can be enough. So we're going to watch a short 60-second video to really ground us in this notion of parents and families are enough despite, despite their challenges. So my post, I made a post yesterday, literally, that I posted on my Twitter and my Instagram. I was standing in my classroom at the end of the day at a little after 6 o'clock. And, I talked about, I was looking at some of the children and thinking back to September and thinking, there are about 4 or 5 of these kids that I was really worried about, thinking I might not have enough skill or capacity. Like, Jesus, I'm gonna need to type like a heavenly intervention to, like, I was really in that place, and I had possessed a lot of early childhood content knowledge and in practice. But I thought, wow, I did that thing that I coach other professionals to do. How do we wait and give it time and space? And I was able to see their growth in multiple areas. And I oftentimes share it with their parents on Class Dojo. But then the post is about this other thing where I talk about, like, the importance of telling young children no. We talk about having yes environments in early childhood, and I get that because it's a constructivist mindset. But this other piece that I think is connected to our topic today is that no, to me, is synonymous with love. And that when we set effective boundaries and limits for children, we push back as parents and we say, I love you and I'll keep you safe. And sometimes a no is that. As teachers, as parents, as other people, that no says, I care for you and I'll keep you safe, setting effective, age-appropriate boundaries and limits. Because so many of the adults I deal with, particularly the parents, they don't want to tell their children no. So I'm always hearing from them, because their 2-year-olds, their 3-year-olds, their 4-year-olds, and their 5-year-olds are literally running the household. So yesterday's post was really about, like, no doesn't have to mean what you think it means. If we really understand that no should and could, for many children, have an explanation, but it can be boundary setting. So when parents are looking in this mirror, how are we telling them that they're strong enough? And this was really personal for me because I had about 8 parents out of my 17 children who were all like saying, yeah, my kid wants this and I give it to them. They're afraid to say no in the context and conditions of parenting. So we're going to watch the video next. It's about 60 seconds, but think of, how are we resourcing parents, and how is our message being conveyed that they are enough?
Yes, I'm going to hang up the jackets, okay? I'm really rushing all the time. I don't have enough time just to sit down with them.
Being a full-time mom and having a full-time job, it's not easy. I always worry, am I doing enough with my kids? Am I doing the important stuff that they need?
Can't imagine what is in here.
It feels really powerful.
You guys.
You already have all it takes.
Maybe I just didn't look at it that way because I always want better.
You put your feet in them?
No.
No? I know that I can do it.
Which one is rough?
This one.
It's amazing the little things that we do, we don't even realize we're teaching our kids.
You did it, Mom.
Yay, good job.
You don't really think of brain development at that young of an age, when you're 3 months old.
No, it's you.
this is our first opportunity to share and use the chat, but I welcome people to unmute, maybe 2 or 3 people. But let's use the chat and take about 35 seconds. We watched this really short video that's literally 60 seconds long. As you heard those parents talking, what surfaced for you around messages that you send in your role and responsibilities, or messages that you would like to send in terms of your role and responsibilities? Let's share out in the chat. We'll take about 35 seconds. When parents and families look in the mirror, what is it that they're seeing? Lupita says, spending enough time with our children, there is always a guilty feeling. Thank you, Lupita. Anat says, parenting can be hard. It is. It's the most challenging job in the world, and doesn't mean you're doing it wrong. Anat, what I learned from my brother years ago, he was the first one to have a baby out of all my mother's children, and my nephew was now in his early 20s. I'm an early childhood person, so I was working in San Mateo County for the Institute for Human and Social Development. So I sent all these books, and I sent all of these like developmentally appropriate toys. And I called my brother and I said, you need to do this, this, and this. And I remember him, because he's my brother, he said, wait a minute, I know you're the eldest and I listen to you. He said, but this is my first child and I'm learning on the job. He said, I expect to do some things right, and I expect to learn from some errors. And it was like this moment for me where I was like, not I'm gonna back off, but he needs to experience it in the way that was real for him, as a new father, instead of me saying, do all of these things. And then when they don't meet them, like Anat said, you end up feeling like, oh, I did it wrong, or this guilty feeling of I didn't do enough. So it was really helpful for me years ago. Dr. Nunley says how much we have created trauma for our own parents. Wow. And FYI, everyone, Dr. Nunley is my godmother. So thank you for showing up, Dr. Nunley. She's home resting a injured leg and knee. Danielle says positive reinforcement, patience as a parent. Patience, yes. They already have strengths, Amanda says. The little things that count the most, right? Sometimes it's just a look or a smile. Oh, Vanessa Hernandez says the importance of helping the people we work with feel that they are enough. Yes, we must consider the overall message we may be giving them in our interactions. Yes, it's important, right, to meet others where they are at and empower them. That's right. So Vanessa, I'm going to speak to that a little bit. And then Michelle Tyler says we have an important responsibility to help parents feel like they can do this. That's right. So Vanessa, when you talk about meeting them where they are, I think this is so crucial. Because what we mean by this is we need to validate their experience regardless of what their experience is. It may be an experience that I don't value, but if it's something that they value, then when I meet them where they are, this is what they should feel and experience, that I've met them right there at the arc of their ability and capacity or knowledge or skill, and not, I'm right here as the content expert and I need you to rise up. I'm not meeting you where you are. I did it to my brother years ago, over 20 years ago. I was saying, here's what he needs, and we're going to make sure as a village raising him that he gets all of these things. And my brother was like, well, I'm right here and I've never done this before, and I need you to meet me here, and then we can do this together. But he was saying, if you expect me to do this, I'm going to always be chasing something and never feel full as a father, as a new father. It was so life-changing for me. Chi Ying is here. Hey, that's my good friend. She said, when parents try so hard to give in care, they forget about themselves. We always got to put our oxygen mask on first, always. So Vita says, you're doing the best. Stephanie Joseph, hi, Stephanie. I know Stephanie too. It's important that families are validated. It isn't easy. Lorna Knight, hey, Lorna. This is a big job and you don't get time off at all. You don't get time off. Wow. Thank you all for that. Whew, that was enough right there for its own training, just that. that feedback in the chat alone. Thank you for that, everyone. So the next 3 slides, I'm not going to spend a great deal of time on, but I want you to add them to your arsenal. So I created this chart at the beginning of the pandemic when we were telling parents and families to institute routines, to have schedules at home. We wanted children's homes to resemble education. In essence, we became oppressive to families because we wanted their home lives to look just like group care. And I pushed back to a few places and said, like, I created this juxtaposition of we all mean the same thing, but we get there differently. So Lillian Katz said years ago, if she's still alive, she has to be about 90. But I haven't received anything that she's transitioned, so I'm believing she's still alive. But she wrote this book over 30 years ago that looked at the 7 practices that are different between a parent and family and a teacher. And one of the big pieces she said was, families are concerned with their child, the teacher or the group is concerned with all the children in the group. Our goals are similar, but they show up different. And this sometimes, everything on the right side of this chart in the blue, we can push down to the green side. And when they don't do it that way, we tell them they're ineffective. So we're behaving in this way that doesn't give value to the trial and error of parenting. And then we become oppressive and can create small T's, small traumas for families. So I like to say, over any learning, no matter our role and responsibility, we have a priority to make sure that all families feel, and you know I love Dan Siegel for this, that they need to feel safe, that they need to feel soothed, seen, and those 3 S's create the condition for them to feel secure. That is part of our role and responsibility, right? That all families, all parents have access to secure relationships, even if you were at the front desk and you only see me 4 times a year for checkups and things like that. I should feel safe and secure in those contexts and conditions. Another part of research that isn't brand new, but is coming back into the spotlight, comes from Dr. Ed Tronick. And this is that still face experiment that's been redone in a bunch of different countries, a bunch of different ethnicities to see if it stayed the same. So Dr. Tronick told parents and families and caregivers that we are only in sync with the child or children 20 to 30% of the time, meaning only 20 to 30% of the time are we perfectly aligned. A lot of parents get this and say, I put all this work into these kids and they're telling me only 30% of the time. And then we spend 70 to 80% of the time getting back in sync. So getting back in sync is doing the work of being responsive. So for those of us who choose to get back in sync, we do the work. And then we end up back here. And then something happens, and then we make a conscious choice as an adult. Will I get back in sync with this child or children via their family, via their parent? Will I just say too bad? So this notion of 20 to 30% and 70 to 80% is still fundamentally important for us to hold when we're thinking of family engagement and being trauma responsive. So I want you to hold that as another core theme around when are the times that you can think of being in sync, not just with a child, but with their parent or caregiver. And when are the times that you feel out of sync, right? When you feel out of sync. I know I have a few children in my class who have 2 households. Their parents are no longer together, they're divorced. So one week, one parent has the child, the next week, the other parent has the child. They both like to talk, but one time they caught me in the middle and I felt really, really out of sync and I didn't know how to get back in sync with them. So because I felt like trust was violated and breached, I pulled back. And I realized that when I pulled back, I was creating further this juggernaut of us, being more and more out of sync with both parents. And then as a professional, I had to think about, what do I have to do to get back in sync, regardless of what this parent said and what this parent told me the other one said? What did I need to do to get back in sync? How could I learn from this experience? And for me, I'm not going to say it was traumatizing, but it did create a rupture for us. So some people might say that was a small T. So I had to do some things to get back in sync with them. So what are we doing to get back in sync when these things happen? Early and often, because they will, I promise you. So when I think of equity and I think of trauma, I've created this frame. I've created this frame that I'm actually teasing out in many ways. But many of us have been introduced into this notion of what is wrong with you. So Shawn Bryant says, when we say that to any family, my response is no. That is not an effective or better question, right? And then we heard, Oprah and, Bruce Perry, who I love Bruce Perry's research. I follow him religiously and learn so much from him around neuroscience and trauma. But they start talking about this whole, what happened to you, which is more being trauma informed. So let me listen to your story to understand how you ended up here. Shawn still says, nope, not enough. And there are many people who they trained in these two slides are the essence of being trauma informed. If you're out there and you're trying to spread the word and do the work and spread the gospel, I'm not going to get into your way. Just when and where I enter and what's happening fundamentally is a little bit different. That there's these other places we need to situate. So then we start saying the third step is for us to ask families to identify what's strong in you. What's strong in you? And then we hear how they have identified their core strengths. So oftentimes if I do parent facilitated PDs, one of the things I ask parents to do, one of the activities, and you're free to use it, just give me credit. I'll ask them to identify, I'll say, take 3 to 5 minutes and think about the one thing as a parent you do well. In this well that you're holding on to, what do you do well? And how could you teach it to someone else? That's how you know you understand and do something well. And then I have them stand up and they say all kinds of things. And to date, the best one that I heard from a woman, a mom, she said, I play with my 4-year-old son really well. She says, he's helped me to become a really great player that I can play with him really, really well. And I was like, wow. And then some parents say, I'm really organized and I can, I can teach other parents how to be an organized parent to keep your house in order. And they go on and on and on around identifying what's strong in them. Because so often what happens when you talk to parents and families, the first thing that comes out of their mouths are the things they believe they don't do well. That's oftentimes where we start. That's the bottom of the brain. So identifying what's strong in you actually pushes them to the top of the brain to think about logically, what are the things that I do well that I don't even think about, but I do them every day. But the 2 things that I think about are the things that I'm not doing or want to do, but we forget about the 17 things that we do every day. And then this 4th place is for you to say, what can I do about it? This is the responsiveness that I'm challenging us all to get to. And my response is yes. So this is what this means. It doesn't mean you're going to do it for them. Because some people think when I say, what can I do about it? I'm doing it for them. So the visual that I've played with thus far is imagining that you're climbing, you're at one of those rock climbing facilities and you're climbing up the rock. It's a fake rock. You're in Berkeley and you're pretty much safe. But then somebody is standing on the ground and they're holding that rope while you climb that rock. That is the responsiveness. The person who is on that ground holding that rope for me is being trauma responsive while I'm climbing that rock. So this is what I believe is an equitable stance of what can we do about it. Another frame I want you all to hold as we move forward. Wait a minute. I wasn't moving the slides. I'm sorry, everybody. I got caught up in the conversation. So this is what it looks like. Here we are. This is the right slide that we should be at now. And I apologize. I was on my soapbox and wasn't hitting forward. So the work. Most of us are where that red arrow says we are. And then what most of us believe is, thank you, Kay Goodwin. I appreciate that. What most of us believe is that this is a straight line that is linear. And anytime you set yourself up in that way, what you're going to experience is a lot of disappointment and a lot of sadness. That this work of being trauma informed and trauma responsive in family engagement, moving from family involvement, it looks like a toddler squiggled on this page. But that is the work, that we don't determine the future. The experience and the process determines the future. So as much as you can hold on to the process and the experience, that's how the work becomes enriching and forward moving. And I thank my friend David Clifford, who's an educator in the Bay Area, who I borrowed this frame from and added to it in many ways. And I should have put his name on the slide. I will do that. David H. Clifford. This frame I borrowed from David. So here's another frame that I've been exploring in multiple ways around how are we building with families? How are we building with families? So pay attention, because I'm going to ask you all to participate in just a moment. So this frame that I created considers that when we think of family engagement, some of our programs, our schools, we're providing services to families. And some of this is in the book, but it's written differently. Meaning we have parent and family nights the second Tuesday of the month. Things like we ask families to volunteer on Saturday to clean our yard at our preschool. We make sure all families sign the forms to receive these support services. And we tell them things like, make sure you arrive on time to pick your child up from the after school program. We're providing services to families. There's a continuum here. And then when services are provided for families, it begins to sound and feel different. Here, you may say, we have a food pantry here at the, Healthy Families in East Oakland for families in need. We utilize talk, read, and sing for children. Then we said we partner with Tandem, and I love Tandem, by the way, and send home bags with good stuff for you to read. All great resources, but they're for families. So Laura, who's a contributing author, she talks about, who works in Berkeley, a father who had lost his job and they wanted to give him food. And he was like, wait a minute, I can't take this around his experience because of how he felt. He was made to feel. But he said, I will volunteer in the kitchen and help. And in volunteering, then he felt like he could take food home. So instead of saying we have talk, read, and sing, how do we begin to listen so that we're not just providing services for families? And then we move to this providing services, this notion of with families. Here we engage families with, what do you want for your child or children? Tell me about what you want to focus on for your child or children. And then we listen and we take that in. And then this notion of from families, when the parent says, I want to parent differently, but I'm struggling to fill my toolbox. Where they say, as a father, I want to be there, but I work 12 to 14-hour days. What can I do? What can I do? So again, we're going to use the chat box for the 65 people that's on here. Think about your program, your agency, your school, your clinic. In this building family engagement continuum, do you provide services to families, from families, with families, or from families? And be honest, if your supervisor's on the call with you, it's okay. Does your agency provide services to, for, with, or from? Let's use the chat box and see where we fall. Thank you, Danielle. Oh, Lupita said we provide for all. All 4 collaborative efforts, Tamika says. Okay. Sure. Shakira says currently it's 2, but we're working on it being with. I love that. I love that, Sharika. There we go. Hope says yes, all 4. In a better way, we provide all 4. There we go. Awesome. Awesome. Maria says with and from. We do support groups and parent-child programs. Thank you for that. So essentially, and you all can keep it going in the chat. Thank you for those who added to it. This notion of across all levels means we're doing something different, and we're hearing families across that continuum in doing things traditionally. Those things at the beginning of the continuum are traditionally how we provided services to families, saying this is what we do, you can come get this and you leave. And as we build that continuum, what we're really building is relationship. And that the more relationship we build with them, our engagement begins to change. And that's what you should see across the continuum. The lack of transactional kind of interfacing with parents and families, and really saying you direct and guide this path as a parent or family. And I'm excited when I read the chat that many of you are saying your agency or in your role, you're doing it across all 4. Michelle Tyler says, I think we provide all 4 depending on the situation and the family, that highly individualized one. And then thank you, Kendra. She says 2 and 4. 2 and 4. Some of us say in the context of just what we provide, this is the structure of it, and this is what it looks like for us and for families. But we have that goal of what? Moving across the continuum. Thank you all for that. All right, let's take a moment, just 60 seconds. So I want you to get a piece of paper that you have, a pen, a pencil, crayon, dry erase, whatever is important to you. Let's take 60 seconds, and I want you to answer these prompts. I already, based on what we've covered so far, I didn't realize I need to. I didn't realize I need to. So take a minute on your own and write them down. They're with you. All right, so as some of you have brought your responses to a close, those who are continuing, I want you to pick one, not all 3, but just one. You can do the already, I didn't realize I need to, and let's just add it to the chat. Let's share out in the chat. Either your I already, I didn't realize I need to. All right, Dr. Nundy says, I already suspected that we were messing up. All right. Michelle Tyler says, I need to learn and understand more. Ooh, I love the Jasmine. Jasmine said, I need to put more emphasis on helping families identify their strengths. Amazing. Amazing. Talking about a coaching mindset. Danielle says, I need to be more open to listening and not forge an opinion about a family situation. I didn't realize how traumatizing we actually are. Rosa said, I need to be more open to new ideas and to try to understand different ideologies. It's transformational, Rosa. personal experience. Amanda says, I need to be more mindful of my language choices and the impact it can have. Thank you, Savita. I need to understand practice more. Yeah. Hope says, I need to figure out how best to reach those families that never participate. Ooh. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Hope, I would think the simple question and profound question of to ask them, what would you need to participate? What would it look like for you to participate? And then how comfortable we are with people participating on the periphery, where it seems like they're not participating, but they're listening and they're thinking about it and they're never sharing it back with us. But then participation and engagement typically looks a certain amount of ways. I think that's a fantastic reflective question, Hope. Yeah, awesome. Helping families feel heard. There we go. Oh, Lorna says, I need to listen for what is not said. Thank you, Fernando. The things they need from me. Wow. Keep those coming and keep your reflections activated. I'm going to move us forward. So Dr. Gabor Mate says it goes way back. One of the things that I heard him say, he says, we don't respond to the present moment. We respond to the past. And he says that's what trauma is. That's what trauma is. That oftentimes when faced with parents and families and their trauma might show up, we're really faced with their past. And I'm going to give you some examples of that when we move into the mindsets. So let me go back because I left something out in moving fast here. Dr. Gabor says, or Dr. Mate says, we don't respond to what happens, but to our perception of what happens. So I like to add to that, our perception becomes our reality. Our perception becomes our reality. And when faced in traumatic situations, of all possibilities, the vast majority of us choose the worst one. Again, we don't respond to the present moment, we respond to the past. So these three I'm not going to read. So in the book, we roll out 3 definitions of 21st century family engagement, one from the National Association of Family, School, and Community Engagement Policy Council, one from the Human Services, and one from some thought partners. But I'm not going to read them to you here on the screen. They'll be in your slide deck, but I wanted you to know that that's where our guidance comes from. And from there, we end up with 4 considerations for make sure it's all there. Okay, it's all there. For 21st century family engagement. This notion of family engagement should be an interactive process of relationship building, right? That it should occur in the context of an ongoing and collaborative relationship with every family, right? And this responsive to a family's language and culture. See, we can make better choices about practices and activities that are based on what? The goals of not just the early childhood program, but the parents and families. And this happens when parents and families participate in these experiences and activities, and they seize them as opportunities, right? And it's ongoing, and it requires our time and our attention. And I heard some of you in the chat talk about the things you're doing and how you're going to reflect to do them differently. That's that time and attention that it requires. That it's more than just an exchange of information. It's not papers, but it's also stories of who these families are. It's not offering advice and recommending resources or giving written information, but it's inviting parents in to tell and share their stories of how this could be more meaningful to them. So intertrauma. So another quote from our book, to be around being trauma informed, from Dr. Bryant says, to be informed is to receive information. To be transformed is to be changed or altered as a result of that new information. So what this really says is to be informed is insufficient with the vast majority of the families that we work with, or I should say that I work with across our country, that it required me to be responsive to who, what, and how they were, are, and will be. So this combination of the past, the present, and the future all showing up simultaneously. But simply to be trauma informed simply goes back to that notion of what's wrong with you. So in the book, in chapter 1, I lay out 25, in the book we call them strategies, but I like to say that they're mindsets, and I call it making it real. This is one of the handouts that Leah gave you. So the next slides, I'm going to go through those ways we can make 21st century family engagement practical and real for us in some small ways, in some small but meaningful ways. So this notion of family engagement happens at the first port of contact. This is really that if your families go to your website, if they fill out an application, if they talk to someone, if they call on the phone, that first point of contact is family engagement. So if your website says fill this information out, and then they have to keep calling and they get an appointment, and then you make them fill the same information out, you've engaged with them in a very negative way, right? If the person who is sitting at the front desk, Ms. Mamie's been working here at, the agency on the hill for 35 years, and she's kind of surly and cantankerous. When people come, she's like, yeah, who are you here for? And we kind of laugh at Ms. Mamie and just say, oh, Ms. Mamie's just always cantankerous. What Ms. Mamie really is doing is showing up and pushing her trauma on everybody. And then we normalize it in this way and say it's acceptable, and it isn't, right? So the first point of contact when we're being trauma responsive in terms of family engagement says a tremendous amount. And there are too many Miss Mamies out there in the world, and I've met too many of them. Okay, Goodwin said true in all caps. So this notion of knowing that we can't be effective in our work with children and families unless we understand the context and conditions through which they show up, and that is their family. So I need to know, how did you spend last night? I need to know what it is your parents and family members think are important for you, for me to really, really make a difference. And this third one considers, how do we show up and disrupt deficit-based language, stories, and thinking about parents and families, right? How do we show up and say, we're going to do this differently? So I'm going to share a story now that actually really fills up one of the others later, but I'm just going to share it now. So I was in Oakland working as a consultant for a very large Head Start program. And this was the fall of 2019, before the world pretty much changed. And I was just a consultant. And the parent came to the front desk, and she had some papers and she was ringing a bell. And the center director was like in the kitchen, like helping the cook because she wanted to avoid her. The mental health consultant went in her office and closed the door. The two family advocates kind of were looking like, who's going to go talk to her? Who's going to go talk to her? Their on-site coach, everybody kind of just went a different way. And then the director said, when you go, because I'm thinking of parents out here, the director says, well, Shawn, will you go talk to her? I say, of course I will. So I walk over to her and I say, hello. And she's shaking the papers at me. And, if you've ever met me in person, I'm short in stature. So she's taller than me. And she says, you all are trying to kick my baby out. You are trying to kick my baby out because she has a disability. So at one point I'm at the door and she's standing at the desk. So I walk over to her and we're just close. And I look up at her because I realize what's happening. And I look up at her and I say, you love your daughter. You should be upset. And if you pay attention to not just how a person is physically showing up, but paying attention to how the tone and the tenor of how they show up, I could feel her fear and her frustration. And when I said, you love your daughter, you're supposed to be angry, I met her where she was and I validated it. I didn't say, you need to calm down or I'm gonna call the police. You have to sit down and make an appointment. I didn't do all of that foolishness. I met her where she was and I validated where she was, and she immediately calmed down because she was looking at me like, little man, why are you like this close to me? You could see she wanted to say it, but she didn't say it. Then I said, can we sit down? And we sat down and I sat this close to her. Our knees kept bumping. And I knew I was, for her, probably too close, but I did it on purpose. Because what ended up happening, she started grinning. It was like a nervous grin because I knew what she was thinking. Why is he so close to me? And then my knee bumped hers a few times and I was listening to her tell her story because I needed her to not just feel heard, but to know that what she was saying would be acted on. And I was creating, as quickly as possible, a responsive alliance with her. Now, when I tried to hand her over to the family advocate and the center director, it didn't work. And it didn't work because every time she came back to the school, no matter how many times I said, I'm not an employee, I'm a consultant, she was saying, where's that man at? Where's that man at? Because she had more paperwork for her daughter who was going to Oakland Unified School District in the morning, special day, and coming there in the afternoon. And, when she learned my name, she would say, where's Mr. Shawn? Then the grandmother and the uncle, where's Mr. Shawn? The whole family is looking for me. And I keep trying to give them to the family advocate and the director. But it was because I heard her in terms of being trauma responsive. I knew enough to know that she was bringing her past with her. She has the daughter with severe disabilities. She was bringing all of that with her and how she's had to fight to move anything. That wasn't what I needed to see. I needed to see what was behind that. And what's behind that was care, love. And that's what a trauma responsive person responds to. But in practice, it can look another way. So this parent posted this on I think it was Twitter and X now, and I thought it was fantastic. Her daughter's preschool teacher had written this, and she shared it. And I want you to think, when you hear this, how is this teacher demonstrating trauma responsive practices? So the teacher says, if your family is experiencing difficulty at home, I would like to provide additional support at school. I understand the details are not always to be shared, and that is okay. Because anybody that works with young children knows they're going to tell their business anyway. So we don't want the parents to all the details. I don't need to know the dirty details. If you choose to, but that's not what this is about. She says, if your child is coming to school after a difficult night, morning, or weekend, grouped it all, anything could have happened, right? Please message me, Handle with Claire, on Class Dojo or at my email. She says, nothing else will be said or asked, meaning I'm not going to take you down this question tunnel. She says, this will let me know that your child needs a little bit of extra time, patience, help, and a lot of love during the day. As always, we are a team, and I want to help your child thrive in school. So when I saw this, I was like, wow. So some people say, well, that was just a nice preschool teacher. No, this is a way that in daily practice, we can practice being trauma responsive in our daily practices, So your question for reflection is, how is this teacher demonstrating trauma responsive practices? How is the teacher demonstrating trauma responsive practices? Let's hear from some people in the chat. Or you could unmute and bring your voice to the space, whichever one works for you. All right, I might have to call on somebody. So Evan, you're smiling. Evan, how is this teacher being trauma responsive? The smile brought me in.
They're clearly providing support, but without demanding that they share anything in particular or just like intruding into that.
There you go. Awesome. Thank you, Evan. That's it. Creating the space in the context without demanding anything. That's right. Danielle says, by acknowledging what happened to the family, but not being intrusive, and she is being supportive to them. Jasmine says, receiving the Handle with Care message would also allow the teacher to look beyond the child's behavior to more quickly identify and meet the child's needs. That's right. That's right. Anat says, an invitation with no pressure or demands. Jenny says, allowing families the space to ask for help without explanation, right? Because typically when you ask for help, you got to say why you want the help. Imagine that changing for everybody, that one could essentially ask for help without ever saying why I need the help, and that the help could be received, right? Imagine how that could help someone like Shawn, my father told me growing up, I need you to be able to take care of yourself. So, and I'm going to use this word, so forgive me if anybody's offended. He said, you're going to get an education and be able to take care of yourself your whole life so that you don't have to ask anybody for shit. I heard that growing up. Like, that's what I heard. So anybody that knows me personally knows I struggle to ask for help. And Dr. Nunley will tell on me, but I'm going to tell her not to right now. I struggle to ask for help because the frame that I heard, not that it was traumatizing, but it created a mental model of it's not okay to ask for help because you need to be able to do it yourself and not ask for help. So here in my 50s, I am just contending with it is okay and it feels good and it's freeing to ask for help from those who care, love me, and know me. Carlos says, this is great because this is highlighting possible issues without getting specific, providing support, not judgment. Carlos. Matthew says, you can tell by the words they chose that they are being as inoffensive and respectful as possible. Hope says she's meeting the parents where they are with their challenges. Creating a safe space, Guadalupe. This is great because it helps prepare the teacher for the day and give them a heads up. That's right. Thank you all. Our next one considers listening to and valuing families. This is what I was talking to, I had mentioned earlier when Vanessa had made a comment around that validation. Because so often we think if we validate something, that means we accept it. But your validation does not mean you accept it. Your validation says, I am willing and flexible to meet a parent and family where they are. That's all it is. It does not say, I value what you value or I accept what you're saying. It doesn't. But so often we think our pushback is, if I validate that, or validate what this parent and family is, or what they value, that I may be saying, I do the same thing. I do the same thing. And the next one, how do you find out what a family's needs are? Like, how do you really find out what a family's needs are? And what I found is you don't find out in one way. It's through ongoing and continuous communication that their needs change over the context of being in your program, your school. So we have to do it in multiple ways to find out what their needs are. I had a parent this morning during breakfast. She brought her son, and then she said, so her and her grandmother are both kind of like in her son's life. But grandmom has a way of understanding as a grandmother. Well, she's the great grandmother, actually. So she's the parent's grandmother and she's the child's great grandmother. So she's not our mother, she's her grandmother. So you can imagine that structure and the age difference. Great grandmom has a different frame around how this parent should be living her life. This single mother has 2 jobs. So grandmom always says she needs to give up one of those jobs. Her son is first, yada, yada, yada. She's going on and on and on. And I'm thinking, this woman's working 2 jobs. Like most people would applaud that. And then she doesn't ask the grandmother for help. So the grandmother picks him up sometimes. And then she'll say things like, I shouldn't be here. Then I talk to the mother and she says, I didn't ask her to pick him up. She said she was picking him up. So all of these things happen, but mom, because we have a relationship and I keep conveying to her, you filled out the application if you're going to come to this school. And every time I ask you something, you follow through. I made sure that I told her this morning. I told his speech therapist, his occupational therapist, and he receives a lot of support. He's on the spectrum. And the other support person that comes for him, that when you talk, they all say, I talked to grandmom, but I haven't talked to mom. And I give them all mom's phone number and say, talk to mom. See, grandmom's constantly getting in the way, but grandmom doesn't know that mom has particular needs. Mom wants him to get more speech therapy. So I'm working with mom to call an IEP meeting for her to say, here's all this data, and then here's all this time due process, hint, hint to anyone listening, that my son didn't get services. I want to call that up now. Grandma's not involved in this at all, doesn't even know. So meeting the family's need will change if we're in relationship with them and they know that the relationship is about them, not us, right? Then this next one, I love this one. Around keeping your programs, policies, and procedures fluid, right? Responsive and flexible. So I dare some of you to open your programs, policies, and procedures. If you're in an agency that is more than 25 years old, I guarantee you there's something in their handbook that was written 25 years ago that has never been updated. Somebody put a emoji. I guarantee you to look at it and you're going to see that there are policies and procedures in there that have never been considered in the last 2.5 decades. I promise you, I promise you, I promise you. So being trauma responsive, and when we think of 21st century family engagement, if we just consider millennial families alone, if we're thinking of young children 8 years and under, there were things that my parents saw as just and right that my cousins who are in their 20s and 30s that have children see it completely different. How are our policies and procedures responsive to the changing needs and demands of modern parenting, right? Hope says we've been around for over 70 years. Check out that manual. And then what we do hope is we say, oh, we have a policy and procedures committee. And then what the committee does is they flip through it. And what we're looking for is places where we can put more rules in, places where we can insert things to say, know this, know that, instead of saying, the way this is written in such a negative frame. How do we change this to be responsive to families, right? And then this notion of co-creating experiences that are meaningful to them. So co-creation looks like this. So I had a number of families that I didn't know really had an issue with Halloween. It was like 3 really religious families that were like, we're not going to come when the kids have on their little Halloween outfits. And I must admit, I was a little taken aback because, you know, I think it is harmless. And they have strong reservations and feelings about it. So then what we decided to do, instead of them saying they're not going to come, we came together, just a few families and a few staff folk, and said, how do we co-create this together so that children, it was one of those both and situations. Children got to still wear their uniforms. One little girl at Circle said, you know, I'm a Christian and I don't believe in Halloween. Like all the kids were talking about what their uniforms, their outfits are going to be. And it was okay. And we went to the next kid. She got to say that out loud. And you can tell an adult gave her that frame. But what we ended up doing was having a harvest festival, and children got to still celebrate something on that day that was, you know, an experience that they wanted to have. I think we had way too many Spider-Man outfits. I had about 5 Spider-Men in my classroom, or Spider people, I should say. But it was that both and instead of we're doing the harvest festival and then children saying, can I wear my Halloween costume to school? Because the reality is many of them don't walk up and down the street at night, because the Halloween that existed, you know, in the 70s when I was walking around the streets trick-or-treating with just my cousins is not the Halloween of today. Even parents who live in affluent neighborhoods don't want to walk up and down the streets with their children. So the school becomes this safe space for them to do all of those things, get a candy bag, and then go home. So that both and of co-creation is being trauma responsive. So in our book, when we talk about being trauma responsive, we talk about to be trauma responsive is to take actions for positive change. We talk about change in our language and our beliefs and our policies, making shifts in those policies that lead to shifts in practices. I'm going to say that again. When we revise our policies and our handbooks and our guides, It should have a direct connection, a visible connection to how that should create shifts in practice, right? And then that gives us the opportunity to move from this notion of practices that are child-centered to engaging and involving parents and families at the first point of contact. So if you paid attention when we first opened up and I talked that slide that had me on it, I talked about really valuing family-centered practices. Even though in early childhood, as a teacher and a teacher educator, we learn about child-centered practices. I worry about that because it precedes family-centered practices, and it should be family-centered practices that should show up first, because then they'll support child-centered practices. But we're still teaching and learning it the opposite way, because we still have a very Western frame about most things that we do. So this notion of communicating and requesting information so that families feel safe. And here's the most important part. They have a sense of agency and control. What that teacher did was communicating and requesting information so that families were in the driver's seat. They were in the driver's seat, being trauma responsive. Instead of them needing to figure out, how do I respond to this teacher's request? What are they asking me? I don't want them in my business. You know, we're transient right now. And anybody that's used to, you know, housing insecure families, they oftentimes are really, really private. And I had a kid here who they were living in, you know, hotel room after hotel room. And, you know, the more they began to trust, the more the story just came out more and more. But it was through trust and communication. So this next one talks about every interaction. And this one is important to me, which is why I got there, is either we're building trust or we're degrading trust. Every single interaction, the good mornings. So everyone at my school, they laugh at me because they say, Mr. Shawn knows everybody's name. Because it's a value of mine that I have two people who work here, and they call everybody's father, hey, dad, and everybody's mother, hey, mom, even if it's grandpa, hey, dad, or hey, pop. And I'm like, wait a minute. All of these people have names. So essentially, everybody that she calls dad, I call by their name. Everybody that she calls mom, I call by their name. Even the ones that aren't in my class. Acknowledging and building trust in very, very different ways. So my joke to her was, this is why I got more Christmas gifts from all the families than you, because as Dr. Nunley is saying, say my name, an old Destiny's Child song. But it was this joke. But what I was really getting her to see was, I'm telling them that who they are is important and that learning their name was important. You're taking the easy way out, and they know you don't know their name. How do we acknowledge that those interactions set up conditions for how we will engage all year long? So here's another thing, that this notion of power differential. Oftentimes when parents are coming to us, if they're coming to a clinical setting, if they're coming to the education setting, the support service setting, a community-based setting, there's this power differential that sometimes we don't even want to acknowledge, even if we were them before we got hired and had that role of responsibility. We've got to show up knowing that they see us as having this position of power. And oftentimes that power is power over them, right? Meaning their interactions are going to be limiting. We're going to talk in ways that they won't understand. And they'll just simply say, where do I sign? Because I need the services. This is one of those interactions that I call small t traumas that families get used to and they normalize. Dr. Nunley says, your name is your identity, and it is typically given to you by someone who loves you. And sometimes there's a push-pull. My father's name is James. and he wanted me to be named James. And my mother said, "Oh, I don't think so. That's an old name. I want him to have his own name." And, you know, she won, and I was named Shawn. So it's another one I want you all to consider. And then also consider how you identify racially and ethnically, if you oftentimes are working with people who share that same race or ethnicity, and if you don't. This notion of how do we remind ourselves that the behavior I perceive to be challenging or difficult is rooted in the family's care and concern about their child and their outcome. So I shared the story about the parent already, but this notion of what you perceive to be challenging or difficult is oftentimes not what that family perceives to be challenging or difficult, right? We know that people oftentimes raise their voices when they feel like I'm not being heard. Young children get louder when they feel like I don't have a say. So this notion of no matter how I perceive it, how can I shift that and show up in this way that says, what, I'm welcoming you, and you have a right to be here, and you have a care and concern for your child, and I'm going to listen to that, and we can co-construct the next way together, right? The next way together, being trauma responsive. So this next slide I found online. I was scrolling social media, but it really gets to me at the heart of who we are and how it's easy to miss these things. So this posting said, and I changed it and, you know, made it applicable to this slide, but it says, people don't always say, I love you. Sometimes it sounds like, be safe. Or, you know, the number of times I've been at First 5 Alameda County in that training room at an all-day training where there was lunch. And during the lunch break, people always get up and they talk to me. Every single time this has happened, someone else walked over to me and said, whatever the lunch was, they'll say, Shawn, I made you lunch. It's right here. Make sure you eat. These are people who I don't know, literally always showing up to say, I saw you talking. Everyone, there's 75 people in this room, they're eating. And people who don't know me, but are able to say, he's up there talking still. He's not getting any nutrients. I'm going to make him a plate and put it on the first table. I make a joke about it because this happened numerous times. So to me, it's this way of them saying, I care about you. Don't just met you in this training, and I'm going to make sure that you have some of this. So other times it's, did you eat? I was doing the Zoom with the state of Ohio. I was training all of these mental health consultants in the state of Ohio. There are about 250 of them. So we had to have like an AM session and a PM session. And it was like all week. I literally lost that was the first time I've ever lost my voice. And one of the consultants from Ohio, you know, nice Italian woman, in between the AM session and the PM session, she said, Shawn, before we leave, I want you to hear me and hear me well. She said, get something to eat. And I was thinking, how did she know I didn't eat yesterday? Like, how did she know I didn't eat anything between the AM session and the PM session? She says, when you take your break, I want you to get yourself something to eat and something to drink. And then I unmuted and I said, how do you know? She says, I picked up on it and I could tell you weren't taking care of yourself. She had just met me, but this is the care and the way care can show up, right? And this is how our parents and families negotiate space. So this is more than using the textbook, right? These are the ways they can show up that says, whoever you are in your role and responsibility, that I'm picking up on what Dan Siegel's 4 S's in this bi-directional relationship. And it looks and sounds different. And when we get to the heart of that, we're talking about aspects of culture that may be foreign to you, right? They may be foreign to you, but it's family engagement. Some of you may have heard me tell the story. Years ago, I was a mental health consultant, and I did a home visit in Visitation Valley in San Francisco for the program I was working for. And I was sitting on the sofa because I was trying to get the parents to enroll their child in more support services. And mom and dad were both there. And I'm sitting on the sofa, my bag's on the floor beside me. And, you know, dad's standing up and mom's kind of on the sofa and the kids crawling across the floor. And then I look out of my left my left peripheral vision, I see a roach crawling across the floor. So dad's talking, and at the time, I don't know that he sees the roach too. But I'm literally panicking the inside because I'm thinking, I don't want that roach to crawl in my bag. Like he was talking, and all I could think about was, I don't want the roach to crawl in my bag. And at some point, the roach didn't kind of make a beeline. It was getting closer to my bag. And I literally leaned over, picked the bag up, and I stepped on the roach. And when I stepped on the roach, the dad said, "Thank you." And I said, "Huh?" He said, "I was wondering, should I kill it or is it going to crawl under the sofa?" So we were both holding this space. This story to me is hilarious today. But when I did that, some people may say, "Shawn, that's awful. You killed the roach. Judge me if you must. I didn't want the roach coming home with me." But it told dad, and I'm sharing this with you, you know what to do with the roach. So it was a relationship building experience that I didn't even consider. All I was considering was me, and I didn't want the roach to go in my bag and for it to travel with me. But when I did that, it opened him up because he was standing up the whole time. Every interaction after that, he would smile. He was looking forward to me because what that small act that had a whole different meaning for me said to him, "I understand you in the context and conditions." And it built relationship. It built relationship. I would have never guessed that. I would have never guessed it. Oh, thank you, Hope. That's so sweet, Hope. So this next one says, having conversations that are meaningful to the family. In every interaction, linking and building on what is of interest to the family and strengthening trust, attunement, and partnerships. What is important to the families? And the most important part here is this notion of attunement. So I define attunement as Dan Siegel's 4 S's, that in those interactions and conversations, all families and parents feel safe, they feel soothed, and they feel seen. And when those 3 work together, Dan Siegel says that is how we anchor them in security in the relationship. And the same works from adults to children as a trauma responsive way of being in practice. So this one came to me because I had some parents at a Head Start program and some teachers, and the teachers kept saying, "These 2 parents keep asking me what to do with their child. Don't they know what to do with their child?" They were being kind of surly about it. And I'm listening and I'm like, these 2 parents are literally asking you because they respect you. They think you're in a position to offer some sage advice because they're considering what to do with their children. So instead of, and this is that trauma responsive way, seeing it as you don't know how to parent, that's why you're asking me as the teacher. This one came out of this notion of they're asking you because they value you and they think your time and attention is meaningful to them and their child. So it's that reframe. And as I begin to have that conversation with those teachers, they kind of begin to look at it differently around asking a question of you isn't because they're ignorant as parents, but it says a lot of positivity about you, but they saw it through a different lens. They saw it through a different lens. Going back to this doing enough, that it is our job to really have them experience that they are doing enough. Because if you talk to parents of young children, 9 out of 10 of them, if they start talking to you, they're going to start crying and they're going to talk to you about the struggle. And it always feels like they're not there enough. They're working. They don't see their children. They're trying to keep roofs over their head. Even if it's a 2-parent home, you're going to hear about those struggles. So again, these spotlighting everyday interactions, spotlighting. So I have a parent whose son has an IEP, and I notice that he receives occupation. This is a different parent, occupational therapy, and she carries him a lot. He's 4, but she always carries him. And then when he's walking, he trips a lot. And when he's walking, we have a banister because we have to go down a flight of steps to get outside. He kind of just like slips down the steps. So I picked up on this and I shared it with her. I shared with her, like, girl, you're gonna have hip problems real soon. You're carrying this the big kid who can walk. And I challenged her. I said, I challenge you to just hold his hand and he won't run and walk to your car. And as I begin to see it more, I begin to call it out and begin to tell her what I see around how he's navigating space, right? This is just a strategy of everyday interactions that builds a relationship with parent and child. Because here's what the research tells us, and this is the suspension and expulsion research, that children who were asked to leave early learning settings actually created ruptures between parent and child. Meaning we call the parent and say, can you come get little Shawn? And if you do that too much, now my dad and my mom start to get frustrated with me because they're having to leave work. They're having to say who's going to go pick them up. And then what happens is I'm seen even by these two people who love me more than anything as a problem. So the opposite of that is spotlighting the smallest everyday interaction that reflects when parents are doing well. And they're using those everyday interactions to what? Build on. We can be responsive that way. So this next video, I call it Opportunities and Experiences in Trauma in Families. So I'm actually not going to show it, but when Leah sends everybody the link, I'll give you the link to it. It's about 9 minutes long. It's from the Robin Hood Foundation in New York. And the video basically talks to us about 5 families. There's Francesca and Leland, and their 2 children, Abigail and Leland, in the shelter. Then there's Bernice and her 4 children, and she's escaping domestic violence. And there's Tracy Ann and her children, Madison and Raven. And there's Saida. She's the mother of Godfrey, and she talks about when she was in college and got pregnant, her mother and grandmother weren't there, but her home visitor. And then we get introduced to Mame and her 3 children. So my question for you is, how do you miss the trauma in servicing these families and find their strengths when you watch it? And I encourage you to watch it with a coworker, a colleague, but to spend those 9 minutes after the training to continue your learning. So, see, I had it ready to show, but I decided to skip it intentionally this time. So when we are trauma responsive, we say things like, this is what works with the rights. Our response is individualized. Then we say things as, this is what we do with the Williams. It's about relationship with the Williams. This is what works with the Whites. And not a general way that we deal with our families. So here's the big piece I want you to get from this notion of being trauma responsive. This is not about fitting the practice to the family or the individual. This is about, I should say, fitting the practice to the parent and the individual family. This is about fitting the practice to the family and the individual parent, not about placing the strategy on a family or individual parent. Okay, I'll say that again for my own clarity. This is about fitting the practice to the family or individual parent, not about placing the strategy on a family or individual parent. So often our practices are like fitting square pegs into round holes. When we're trauma responsive, we actually what? Weave it into who they are and what their needs are. So it becomes highly individualized and highly relationship built on. And then we talk about environments that are responsive to families' language and culture. Another quote that I enjoy from Lev Vygotsky, where he talks about language and culture are the frameworks through which human beings experience, communicate, and understand reality. Yeah, Lev. This notion of if we're responsive, we're giving families opportunities to share their ideas and feedbacks that are truly free of what? Judgment. How are we taking time as much as possible to slow down and reflect versus being in a hurry? So we're creating that parallel process with families so that they can walk away knowing what that experience feels like and ultimately model it for their children. I love this one. Do you ever recognize that you're left with that parent or family's most prized possession? And for most of them, it's their child or children. As a responsive mindset, as a responsive mindset. Are you paying attention to what's not being said? Lorna said that earlier. To pick up on a parent or family's understanding. This is big for me. This notion of seeking permission. Seeking permission. Are you seeking permission before we do anything with parents and families? Or are we simply showing up saying if they're going to participate, these are the things that they're going to do? The next four, they're in your slide deck, but I'm going to move past them because I want to end with some other slides. So those are the next four and final mindsets, and they're all in your handout. So let's move back to some trauma stuff. So Dr. Amanda Erickson says that inside every adult triggered by a child's behavior is a child who wasn't safe when they behaved in the same way. Talk about trauma. Talk about trauma. So I want to get through these last, what do I have here? 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. These last 10 slides, and then we'll wrap up. Thank you all for staying and being here with us today. And then we can answer some questions, and I want to leave some space at the end. So with this notion of you are enough, when we think of the original 4 F's that we think of when we think of trauma, and then the next session, we're going to build on some because there's been some innovative thinkers who've added some additions to these that I'm really encouraged by. That we've got to remember that families are not dramatic. Families are in a fight response, unfortunately, to some of the conditions that we've set up in our programs, schools, and communities. That families are not being negative. They're in a flight response based on what's being presented. Families are not lazy. Some of them are in a freeze response that we convince ourselves that she's just lazy. No, that's trauma showing up, honey. This is how it shows up because we've normalized it. Some families, they are not doormats. It's a fawn response to trauma. Hold that in mind as you move forward and as we come to our own decisions or conclusions or judgments about the way families are participating or showing up in our programs. As a response, this is something I hold near and dear. I tell myself all the time, families are not broken. When I consider trauma, what I'm experiencing is that family or that parent's nervous system working hard to protect them. They're working hard to protect them. As a response to this that we tell ourselves, right? This is what's really happening through the lens of trauma. Hard to protect them. Then I want to leave you with this notion of a coping strategy and a coping mechanism. So essentially, a mechanism is something that ultimately can have negative results. That many parents and families or adults utilize the things on the left side of the screen as stress coping or trauma coping mechanisms. How do we begin to interface so that the things on the right side of the screen can become strategies? So we know that moving our bodies through time and space actually is a fundamental strategy to reduce stress. Oftentimes when I'm doing work in person with people, I ask them to get somebody in the room they don't know. I give them a question, just one question they need to talk about. And I'll say, take a 12 or 15-minute walk with that person. Set your timer. And I say, and I'm setting them up because they're talking about something difficult. And every time they come back, people will say, this is the first time I've talked about that and I didn't cry. I usually get really upset when I talk about this thing. And I share with them that you probably didn't because you were moving your body while you were doing those things, right? So thinking about those things on the right side. Somebody's printing, I'm sorry. Printer is literally going off to the side of me. Thinking about those things on the right side are strategies as a response, and moving away from the things on the left side as mechanisms. I love this one. The goal is to not always live in a state of regulation, meaning yourself and parents, we're never always in this state of complete regulation. Here is the goal. It's to build tools needed and to recognize when dysregulation occurs. Now, if I've done nothing else over the years, I've built tools and I've identified when my dysregulation has surfaced and I need to do something different. I become really proficient at that because dysregulation shows up in parents and families in a number of ways. Dysregulation can show up in them as, wait a minute, did I skip a slide? As agitation. That's a sign that they're dysregulated, that stress or trauma is activating what we end up experiencing on the other end. That dysregulation can manifest as laughing or smiling. We call it nervous laughter, or for young children and adults, double dip feelings. Sometimes when people are shocked, like, I'm gonna tell you a true story. I was walking to the grocery store yesterday. I got out of my car after work and I was going to the shop, right? And I thought I looked really, really nice, you know. And I had the little bag to go into the shop, right? And I was going up the little incline and I fell face first. Both of my shoes came off and I hurt my left knee. And I got up and I was a little shocked. And a woman was sitting in her car and a woman was behind me. And you could tell they both were trying not to look at me because they wanted to laugh. And being true to myself, I got up. I just put my foot in my shoes like they were flip-flops. And I walked back to my car. And I said, God, you must not want me to buy anything from the grocery store tonight. I'm supposed to go home. And on the ride home, I called one of my good friends and sisters, Dr. Daphne Babber in Atlanta. And she answered, and we ended up talking for 4 hours. And I said, you know, something's about to happen in that grocery store. God doesn't want me in there. I was going to get taco shells to make tacos, but I'm just going to eat what's ever home. And I drove home and I didn't go to the grocery store. But this notion of laughing, the woman walked past me. You can tell she like didn't want to laugh at my face. And when she got past me and I was in my car, I heard her cracking up laughing. But you can see she was shocked too. Like, did he hurt himself? And then when I got up, you can see she was like, okay, he got up. And then when I got past her, but this notion of sometimes people laugh and it seems so inappropriate, but it's actually fear. And the fear can bubble out and surface as giggles. Young children do it and some adults do it. We think it's inappropriate, but it's a sign of dysregulation, okay? You're at work, a parent walks in Monday morning and they're upset. They walk into your office and they tell you, why did this thing happen? Why did the so-and-so get cut off? Why is that child being forced to do this? They're just fuming. And it seems like it's all directed at you. It's a sign of dysregulation. Their fuming is not about you. They have access to you. So the more that you can separate yourself from that and hear what's really happening, this is how we become trauma responsive. Dysregulation, this is huge, can show up as withdrawal and parents not responding. This was relieving for me to get to this point of this isn't about the parent not caring, but that the dysregulation in them showing up as withdrawal and not responding is essentially what? A sign of dysregulation, a sign of stress, or potential sign of an activation of small T or big T trauma for them. So this final one, dysregulation can show up as an adult having a meltdown. Well, thank you, Kamika. I'm not sure what the word of mouth is. What is the word of mouth, Kamika? Having an adult meltdown. So the best one I've seen to date was I was in Starbucks and the older woman was in front of me and she was like yelling at the baristas who all looked like they were 22 and 23, telling them her coffee wasn't hot enough. So in my head, I was thinking, it's hot. They're looking at it like, miss, okay, we'll take it back. We'll make it hotter. So I'm looking at them thinking, read my brain, like, go ahead and burn her. Because she's like berating them. She's filming. And she's literally having a meltdown saying it's not hot enough. So in my head, though, in the logical part of me, I'm thinking, well, she looks an elder. They begin to lose their sense of taste and all those things. So what is hot to the rest of the world can sometimes not be hot to them. That's the logical part of me. But, the not so logical part of me is like, y'all should just burn her. Just give her the coffee until it burns the roof of her mouth, because she's having a meltdown and she's screaming at them that the coffee isn't hot enough. And I think is really inappropriate around what she's doing. But I'm witnessing it and I'm going back and forth between she's completely dysregulated. And then I'm being logical around here's probably what's happening for her. They don't understand it, but witnessing it all. How do we not make that about us? And understand that the adult meltdown is oftentimes a sign of dysregulation. It's a sign of dysregulation. So with that being said, I'm going to skip those right here because they're in the next month. We end with this notion of when we look in the mirror, are we reminding parents that they are enough? Small T, big T around family engagement and trauma. And we end with Dr. Lillian Katz's 7 distinctions. And how do we hold that in mind that what is happening in our programs for children and parents should not and cannot happen within their homes or their living spaces in the same exact way. So I'm going to thank you all for your time and attention. I hope to see you somewhere on social media. Remember, First 5 Alameda wants your feedback. So let's take a minute in the chat and respond to these prompts. And then as you put things in the chat or unmute, we'll spend the last few minutes engaging that way. I wanted to share some time because oftentimes we're rushing and we get through the last slide and it is at the end of the hour. Carlos said, one takeaway is that the work is never done. That's right, Carlos. It's ongoing and continuous. Thank you, Carlos. Thank you, yes, Hasini. If we're intentional, we can do it. Thank you, Dr. Nunley. Make sure we're being more responsive. Make sure they are heard and make sure they feel valued. Thank you, Anita. Thank you, Rosa. Oh, Matthew says the humanity in the work that we do and constantly reminding myself of it. Definitely. Powerful. Evan says dysregulation can show up in many ways and not to take them personally. Definitely. Definitely. It's something I found out over the years, Evan. Oftentimes when parents show up, the person who they're actually demonstrating their dysregulation to is often the person they have the most trust with within the agency or program or school. Ooh, Tatiana says, be understanding with the parents and caregivers. Thank you, Vanessa. She shared a resource of another training. Savita says, I'm going to use this training myself and share with the group. She said timely training. Danielle says, I'm enough. And the meltdowns is dysregulation. Could be. I mean, not to be afraid. I often tell folk, Danielle, in terms of coaching or me leading a PD or mentoring or a lot of leaders I work with, that if you walk into what's uncomfortable for you, I can guarantee you that on the other side of discomfort, on the other side of that fear is not just transformation, but lifelong change. Jasmine said, "Oh, negative behaviors tend to be more than just behavior or habit, but instead of reflection, definitely could be for so many people, depending on the lens that we see it through." Oh, Bobby, thank you for that. Bobby says, your knowledge and compassion about the job encourages me to strive to be better. Wow. Wow, Bobby. I need to, I'm going to have to do something with that, Bobby. Can I might need to repost that, Bobby. You just made my month. Shaying says, consider attunement with families, always. That's right, Shakira. Vanessa said, we can learn from each other, definitely. Thank you. Thank you, Leah. Healing relationships. We're going to touch on that next week, Catherine. That's right, Hope. Have a clear understanding of it. And Hope, and we're going to talk about this next week, Hope, but that trauma is it's not about the event. It's about what happens in me based on the event, right? Leah, Catherine, and I were talking about that we could all experience the same thing. And at one end, person can say, I'm forever changed by this. At the other end, someone's saying, what happened? And in the middle, the other person is like, oh, that wasn't too kind, but we all leave it differently based on who we are. Thank you, Vanessa. Communication and mindfulness around helping folks feel more safe. Dealing with health systems. Whew. Yes. Guadalupe, dysregulation happens in us all. And with the more tools we have and that we recognize that it's dysregulation, we can calm ourselves, connect to calm, and respond differently. Thank you, Lorna. Definitely. All right, we have about 4 minutes left. Thank you all. You can keep it coming in the chat. I appreciate this. And I know Catherine, the training administrator at First Five, she's here on the call. I know that this gives them data and feedback in addition to the evaluation that you all are going to get.
Thank you so much, Shawn. I just want to share a deep appreciation for the thoughtfulness and the work and that the presentation for these trainings. We really, really appreciate this. We're totally looking forward to part 2 of this. And thank you for engaging us in wonderful conversations. Thank you, everyone, for engaging as well. And we appreciate your participation. We look forward to seeing you in our part 2 session. Have a good day.